Imagine yourself stepping into the heart of an ancient city. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meats, freshly baked bread, and spiced stews bubbling in clay pots. Merchants call out to crowds, not selling silk or jewels, but food simple, quick meals meant to be eaten right there on the street. These bustling food stalls were the lifeblood of city life, long before we had restaurants, takeout counters, or food trucks. Street food is not just a modern convenience. It is one of the oldest traditions of human civilization, and it tells us more than almost anything else about the daily lives of ordinary people. While kings and queens dined on feasts in palaces, it was the humbler fare on the street that truly fed the world. And tonight, as you listen, we're going to journey through history, city by city, empire by empire, to discover what street food looked like in ancient times, and how these flavors shaped the cultures we know today. If you enjoy relaxing journeys into the past like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Leave a comment sharing what part of history you'd love to hear about next, and also let me know when you like to listen, whether it is as you fall asleep at night or as a way to calm the mind during the day. Your comments help guide future stories, and they also help others find the soothing side of history. So settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let the sounds of the past carry you into rest. We'll begin our journey where street food first began, in the crowded cities of Mesopotamia, where the world's first urban snacks were served to people just like us, thousands of years ago. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, often called the cradle of civilization, people gathered in the earliest cities Ur, Babylon, and Nineveh. These cities were noisy, filled with merchants, scribes, builders, and travelers, and in such crowded environments, food had to be quick, portable, and filling. While wealthier citizens enjoyed meals prepared in private homes, the majority of ordinary workers, laborers, and travelers relied on food sold in the open air. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that the people of Mesopotamia were already engaging in a form of street dining as early as 2000 BCE. Clay tablets with recipes, remnants of stalls, and written accounts describe a vibrant food culture that extended beyond the home. At the heart of Mesopotamian street food was bread, made from barley, which grew more reliably than wheat in the region's soil. Flatbreads and loaves were baked in clay ovens, their golden crusts carrying the smell of smoke and grain. Street bakers sold bread that could be eaten plain or dipped into stews. Stews themselves were a staple. Lentils, chickpeas, onions, garlic, and a variety of herbs stewed slowly with meats like lamb or goat. For those unable to cook during the day, vendors served these stews in bowls made of baked clay or sometimes even inside bread itself. Imagine a tired laborer stopping by a stall, receiving a steaming portion of lentil stew poured into a hollowed-out loaf and eating it with his hands as he walked back to his work. Beer was another cornerstone of Mesopotamian daily life. Made from barley, it was thick, nutritious, and much safer to drink than river water. Street-side beer sellers offered this hearty beverage to workers, who often drank it through long straws to avoid the grain husks floating at the top. Some stalls specialized in nothing more than serving beer and small bites, creating some of the earliest versions of taverns. Fish, drawn from the rivers, also found its way into the hands of hungry citizens. Fried or grilled, seasoned with herbs, and perhaps wrapped in bread, fish was among the most affordable proteins. Dates, one of Mesopotamia's sweetest gifts, provided a portable snack sold by vendors in baskets. Children and adults alike enjoyed these fruits, sticky with sugar and packed with energy. But what truly makes Mesopotamian street food fascinating is how much it reflected their society. Meals were not extravagant. They were practical, sustaining, and flavored with the same herbs and spices that grew along the rivers. They reveal a world where eating was not about indulgence, but survival and community. Standing shoulder to shoulder at a vendor's stall, men and women from all walks of life shared the same bread, the same stews and the same sweet dates. As we imagine walking through the winding streets of yore at dusk, torches flickering against mud brick walls, the sound of hammers and chatter fading into the night, we can almost smell the bread baking, hear the bubbling of stew, and sense the hum of a city alive with flavor. In that moment, street food was not just about filling the stomach. It was about belonging to the rhythm of daily life in the world's first great cities. When we leave the dusty streets of Mesopotamia and follow the river south to the Great Nile, we step into the vibrant world of ancient Egypt. Life here was deeply tied to the flooding of the Nile, which nourished the soil and allowed wheat, barley, and vegetables to grow in abundance. Alongside temples, markets, and open courtyards, there were stalls where food was sold directly to hungry passers-by. Street food in Egypt was not just about convenience. It was woven into the social and spiritual fabric of daily life. Bread, once again, stood at the center. Unlike in Mesopotamia, Egypt had fertile fields well suited to wheat, and this allowed them to bake a wide variety of loaves. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient bakeries, with clay ovens and charred remains of bread loaves, showing us that stalls must have lined busy streets, offering these warm, hearty essentials to workers and travelers. Some loaves were round, others triangular, and many were flavored with honey, dates, or sesame seeds. Bakers sold them fresh from the oven, the aroma carrying into the crowded markets. For poorer Egyptians, bread was not just part of the diet, it was the diet, eaten at nearly every meal. To wash it down, beer was essential. Egyptian beer was less filtered than what we know today, cloudy and full of grain particles. It was both food and drink, thick with calories, and available everywhere, from palace feasts to humble street vendors. Workers building the pyramids were even partly paid in bread and beer, so it is easy to imagine bustling stalls near construction sites, where pitchers of beer were poured into clay cups for tired laborers. The street-side beer vendor was as important to Egyptian society as the baker. Beyond bread and beer, stalls offered beans, onions, garlic, and radishes, which grew well in the fertile soil. These vegetables were cheap, filling, and easy to prepare in large batches. Vendors might roast them on open fires or chop them into quick stews. Fish from the Nile was another affordable option, grilled or dried and salted so it could last longer. Smoked fish, carried in baskets, was a common snack. Travelers could purchase strips of fish, chew on them as they walked, and enjoy a burst of protein that kept them going. Sweets also had their place in Egyptian street life. Honey, considered a divine food, was used to make small cakes and sweet breads. Dates, figs, and raisins were sold in open baskets, sticky and fragrant in the sun. Imagine wandering through a bustling market in Thebes or Memphis, the chatter of traders filling the air, and pausing to buy a small honey cake to nibble as you strolled. Street food in Egypt was more than sustenance. It was part of ritual and identity. Bread and beer were often offered to the gods, placed in temples as gifts for the afterlife. In fact, many tombs show carvings of food offerings, with loaves, jars, and bowls laid out for eternity. This shows that the same foods Egyptians purchased from street vendors were thought worthy of divine and eternal company. The stalls themselves would have been simple: a low table, a clay oven, a jug of beer, and baskets filled with bread or fruit. But these humble stands brought people together, offering nourishment, rest, and conversation. Picture farmers arriving from the fields, stopping to drink beer with neighbors, or a traveler stepping off a boat at a busy port, buying a loaf of bread and a strip of dried fish before continuing his journey. As the sun set on the Nile and the air cooled, the smell of baking bread and roasting fish would drift through the streets. Vendors called out their wares, while the laughter of children and the murmur of evening crowds filled the air. To eat in ancient Egypt was to participate in something eternal, something that tied every laborer, priest, merchant, and traveler to the same rhythm of life, nourished by the river and flavored by the hands of everyday street cooks. As we journey onward, we find ourselves in the bustling agoras of ancient Greece, where the open-air markets were not just places of commerce, but the very heartbeat of the city. Here, philosophy, politics, trade, and food all intertwined, and the hum of voices echoed beneath the columns of marble buildings. Amid merchants selling pottery, cloth, and livestock, food vendors called out to passers-by, offering quick, affordable bites to satisfy hungry citizens. Greek cuisine was shaped by the land, rocky soils that grew olives, figs, grapes, and grains, as well as the surrounding seas that teemed with fish. These ingredients formed the foundation of Greek street food. Perhaps the most iconic was the olive. Vendors sold them in small piles, pickled in brine or drizzled with oil, ready to be eaten straight from the hand. A philosopher debating under a shaded portico might nibble on a handful of olives as he listened to his opponent's arguments. Grapes, too, were sold fresh or dried into raisins, their sweetness balancing the salt of the olives. Bread remained a constant companion, often sold by street bakers in the form of simple loaves or flat cakes. These breads were eaten plain, dipped into olive oil, or served with cheese. Vendors might also sell small portions of lentil soup or barley porridge, thick, warm, and filling. For those who wanted something more savory, stalls offered roasted meats, skewers of lamb, goat, or fish, grilled over open flames. The aroma of smoke and sizzling fat drifted across the agora, luring both workers and nobles to pause and take a bite. Wine was another key element of Greek street life. Though often consumed in the symposiums of the wealthy, diluted wine was available to ordinary people as well. Street vendors sold it in clay cups, mixed with water, herbs, or honey to make it more palatable. Imagine a sailor returning to port after weeks at sea, drinking a simple cup of watered wine while sharing stories with friends. Cheese, too, was a popular street food. Goat's milk and sheep's milk cheeses were sold in small pieces, eaten alongside bread or fruit. Vendors often carried them wrapped in leaves to keep them fresh. Nuts, particularly almonds and walnuts, added crunch to the array of portable snacks. But food in the agora was never just about eating. It was about the pulse of society. The agora was a place where Socrates might strike up a conversation with a farmer, or where traders from distant lands shared their customs and wares. The street food stalls provided the fuel for these exchanges. Picture a young student, clutching a small loaf of bread and a handful of figs, hurrying to catch a lecture from a philosopher. Or a merchant, pausing from haggling over prices, grabbing a skewer of roasted fish before returning to business. The atmosphere must have been alive with color and sound. Vendors shouting over one another, customers laughing, children tugging at their parents' robes, begging for sweet cakes or honey-dipped treats. Music from street performers might mingle with the chatter as aromas of garlic, herbs, and grilled meats swirled in the air. Street food in ancient Greece revealed much about its culture. It was simple yet communal, nourishing both the body and the social fabric. It was affordable enough for the poor, yet flavorful enough to satisfy the wealthy. And it reflected the Greek ideal of balance between salt and sweet, meat and bread, wine and water, body and mind. As night fell over the agora, torches lit the stalls, and conversations stretched on, mingled with the last bites of bread and wine. In this way, street food became not just a convenience, but a stage on which Greek society unfolded, one olive, one loaf, one skewer at a time. If there was ever a civilization that perfected the art of quick meals for the masses, it was ancient Rome. The Eternal City thrived with millions of people, and not everyone had the luxury of cooking at home. Many Romans lived in insulae, crowded apartment buildings with little more than a brazier for heat, and often no kitchen at all. For them, food was not prepared inside their homes, but bought hot and ready from the streets. This necessity gave birth to what we might call the world's first fast food industry, the Popinae and the Thermopolia. The Popinae were small taverns where simple, inexpensive meals and drinks were served. Workers, laborers, and soldiers could stop in for a bowl of beans, bread, or a cheap cup of wine. The atmosphere was noisy, smoky, and lively as patrons crowded together at wooden tables. The Popinae often attracted the lower classes, and Roman writers sometimes sneered at them, calling them places of gambling, mischief, and rowdy behavior. But for the common people, they were essentially a place to eat, drink, and socialize. The Thermopolia, on the other hand, were closer to what we would recognize today as street food counters. These establishments had large stone counters with deep, jar-like containers set into them, called dolia, which held hot foods kept warm by coals beneath the counter. A passerby could walk up, order a portion of stew, soup, or meat, and eat it on the spot or take it away. Archaeological remains from Pompeii reveal Thermopolia with brightly painted frescoes, some depicting the very food sold inside: roasted poultry, fish, sausages, and even baked goods. Imagine walking through a Roman street, stopping at a marble counter painted with images of ducks and fish, and receiving a steaming bowl of lentils or a cut of roasted pork. The food sold in these places reflected the Roman palate: hearty bean stews, chickpeas seasoned with herbs, lentils cooked with onions and garlic, sausages sizzling on skewers, and fish both fresh and salted. Bread was everywhere, from small rolls to large round loaves baked in communal ovens. For those seeking something sweet, stalls offered honey cakes, pastries stuffed with nuts, and dried figs. Mulsum, a mixture of wine and honey, was a popular drink, sold alongside the cheaper table wines that sustained Rome's population. What makes Roman street food culture fascinating is its scale. These establishments weren't rare. They lined nearly every street, serving thousands every day. A Roman senator might dine on elaborate feasts with exotic ingredients from across the empire, but the average citizen found comfort in the simple, filling dishes from a thermopolium. These were the foods that kept the empire running. Soldiers fortified by hot stews before marching, dock workers grabbing bread and wine after unloading cargo, and children nibbling on pastries as they played in the streets. Street food was also a point of social connection. Though the elite looked down on the Popinae, even they occasionally stopped at Thermopolia during travel, and soldiers in distant provinces relied on such establishments when stationed far from home. Eating at a stall was an equalizer, a reminder that no matter your status, hunger was a universal bond. In Pompeii, archaeologists discovered a thermopolium with painted images of ducks, chickens, and even a dog on a leash, suggesting that these stalls not only sold food, but also created a recognizable brand for their customers. Just as modern fast food chains use logos to draw crowds, Roman vendors painted their wares for easy recognition in a crowded street. Picture Rome at dusk, the forum bustling with citizens, the hum of conversation spilling into narrow alleys, and the glow of lamps illuminating the counters of Thermopolia. A vendor ladles steaming stew into a clay bowl, a group of workers laughs over cheap wine, and a child clutches a sweet cake, crumbs falling onto the stone pavement. This was Rome's answer to feeding its masses fast, affordable, and communal. In many ways, it set the pattern for the fast food culture that thrives across the world today. Traveling eastward, we arrive in the vibrant cities of ancient India, where the scents of spices drifted through bustling streets and markets teemed with energy. Here, food was never just nourishment. It was deeply tied to religion, ritual, and community. The street food culture of India dates back thousands of years, shaped by fertile lands, rich spices, and diverse traditions that made every meal a sensory experience. The foundation of Indian street food was grain, particularly rice and wheat. Flatbreads such as chapati and paratha were sold hot from clay tandoors, their surfaces blistered and smoky, perfect for scooping up lentil stews or vegetable curries. Vendors also sold fried breads, puffed and golden, which crackled when bitten into. These breads provided a quick filling meal for travelers, farmers, and merchants alike. Lentils and legumes formed another cornerstone. Bowls of dal-rich, seasoned stews of lentils were ladled out to hungry customers, often flavored with turmeric, cumin, ginger, and coriander. These dishes were not only delicious, but also packed with protein, making them ideal for laborers who needed strength for long days in the fields or markets. Small clay cups, called kolhads, might hold steaming portions of dal, eaten quickly before being discarded back into the earth. But what truly distinguished Indian street food from that of other ancient civilizations was the use of spices. From cardamom to cloves, black pepper to cinnamon, the streets carried the aroma of flavors that would eventually travel the Silk Road and transform global cuisine. Imagine walking through the markets of Pataliputra, hearing vendors calling out as they fried spiced fritters in bubbling oil, their scent pulling crowds closer. These fritters, made from chickpea flour, onions, and herbs, were crunchy on the outside, soft inside, and perfect for eating on the go. Sweetness was also celebrated in Indian street food. Jaggery, an unrefined sugar made from sugarcane, was sold in chunks or melted into sweets. Vendors offered lattice, round balls of flour, ghee, and jaggery, pressed together into portable treats. Fruit sellers carried baskets of mangoes, bananas, and coconuts, refreshing options in the heat of the day. For thirst, vendors served buttermilk or sweetened drinks flavored with herbs, cooling and hydrating in India's warm climate. Religion also shaped what could be eaten. Many vendors prepared vegetarian foods to align with Hindu and Buddhist dietary practices, ensuring their offerings could be enjoyed by all. Food was often linked to ritual, with some stalls set up near temples to serve pilgrims. Street food became not only a source of energy, but also a form of devotion, as offerings of sweets and fruits were shared both with the gods and with travelers. Picture the streets of Varanasi along the Ganges, boats docking as pilgrims step ashore, the air heavy with incense, and the sound of bells ringing from temples. Vendors line the riverbanks, selling fried snacks, steaming bowls of lentils, and sweet fruits. A traveler sits on the steps, dipping bread into dal, while children run past with honey-soaked cakes. The entire scene is alive with flavor, color, and rhythm. The beauty of Indian street food lies in its continuity. Many of the foods eaten thousands of years ago, flatbreads, spiced fritters, lentils, sweets made from jaggery remain staples in Indian street markets today. To taste them in the past would not be so different from tasting them now. Street food in ancient India was more than a convenience. It was an enduring expression of culture, hospitality, and the art of turning simple ingredients into extraordinary experiences. From the sacred riverbanks of India, we journey further east into the heart of ancient China, where the Han Dynasty gave rise to sprawling cities, crowded markets, and an evolving street food culture that blended tradition with innovation. By this time, China had already cultivated a deep appreciation for balance in flavor, texture, and presentation, and this philosophy carried into the stalls and small eateries that lined the busy streets. The Han Dynasty, stretching from 206 BCE to 220 CE, was a period of immense growth in trade and urban life. Markets became the lifeblood of Chinese cities, with vendors selling everything from silks and ceramics to teas and hot foods. Food stalls offered nourishment not just for laborers and travelers, but for scholars, soldiers, and officials too. The diversity of ingredients available made Chinese street food vibrant and unique. One of the most iconic foods tied to this period was the dumpling. Though exact origins are debated, dumplings, small parcels of dough filled with meat, vegetables, or a mix of both, were beloved for their portability and flavor. A vendor could prepare dozens in advance, steaming or boiling them in large pots, ready to serve to waiting customers. Imagine biting into a dumpling stuffed with seasoned pork and cabbage, the broth inside bursting with warmth and flavor. These little pockets of food not only filled stomachs, but also symbolized prosperity, especially during festivals. Noodles also played a central role. Made from wheat in the north and rice in the south, noodles were cooked in steaming broths flavored with soy, ginger, garlic, and sometimes meat bones. Stalls often had great vats of bubbling soup, where noodles were dropped in and pulled out fresh for each customer. Bowls were handed over, piping hot, perfect for sipping as one continued along the bustling streets. Street vendors also sold roasted meats, strips of pork glazed with honey, skewers of chicken brushed with soy sauce, or whole ducks cooked until their skins were crisp and fragrant. The sizzling of meat on open fires mingled with the sounds of merchants haggling, creating an atmosphere alive with both commerce and cuisine. For those who preferred lighter fare, tofu, already a staple by the Han Dynasty, was sold fried or braised, its delicate texture absorbing the flavors of sauces and spices. Seasonality shaped much of the street food experience. In the warmer months, fruit sellers offered peaches, plums, and melons. In colder times, hot soups and dumplings brought comfort against the chill. Tea, though not yet as widespread as in later dynasties, was available in certain areas, often served in small clay cups that refreshed weary travelers. The stalls themselves were often modest, wooden carts with steaming pots, bamboo baskets filled with dumplings, and clay jars brimming with sauces. Yet they drew people of every social class. A scholar preparing for an imperial exam might pause for a quick bowl of noodles. A soldier returning from patrol might grab skewered meat before heading home. The streets themselves became equalizers, where rich and poor alike could enjoy the same flavors. The influence of the Silk Road also began to appear in the markets of the Han Dynasty. Spices, nuts, and fruits from distant lands were occasionally incorporated into dishes, making Chinese street food an evolving fusion of local and foreign flavors. Vendors adapted quickly, experimenting with new tastes while preserving their traditional staples. Picture a market in Chang'an, the bustling capital. Rows of stalls steaming in the morning air, vendors shouting their wares, and customers huddled around small tables, slurping noodles or biting into dumplings. The city's heartbeat could be felt in every corner, and food was at its very center. In the Han Dynasty, street food was more than just a quick bite. It was a way of life, one that reflected both the harmony of Chinese philosophy and the dynamism of a growing empire. As we move west once more, we enter the vast and diverse lands of the Persian Empire, a realm that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley. This immense territory connected cultures, peoples, and cuisines, creating a tapestry of flavors that could be found not only in the courts of kings but also on the bustling streets where ordinary Persians dined. Street food here reflected both simplicity and sophistication, borrowing influences from conquered lands and weaving them into dishes that would feed merchants, soldiers, and travelers alike. Bread was again a staple, but in Persia it took on new forms. Flatbreads were baked on hot stones or in clay ovens, thin and flexible, perfect for folding around meats or vegetables. Vendors sold them hot, sometimes sprinkled with sesame or brushed with oil. These breads served as both plate and utensil, making them ideal for quick meals on the go. A laborer could purchase a piece of bread, wrap it around spiced meat or beans, and eat it as he walked through the crowded bazaar. Grilled meats were among the empire's most beloved street foods. Skewers of lamb or goat, seasoned with salt, garlic, and herbs, sizzled over open fires, their aromas wafting down the narrow streets. These early versions of kebabs were portable, affordable, and flavorful, appealing to everyone from farmers to soldiers marching through distant provinces. A traveler stopping at a roadside stall could easily grab a skewer, a piece of bread, and continue on his journey. Lentils, chickpeas, and beans also played an important role. Vendors sold stews thick with pulses, flavored with cumin, coriander, and sometimes dried fruits for a hint of sweetness. These hearty dishes sustained those who could not afford meat, but still needed filling meals. Dates, figs, and pomegranates were sold fresh or dried, their sweetness balancing the savory richness of other street foods. A vendor might carry baskets filled with dried fruits, offering a handful for a few coins to children or weary travelers. Dairy, too, had its place. Yogurt, already part of the Persian diet, was served plain, mixed with herbs, or thinned into refreshing drinks. This cooling accompaniment balanced the heat of grilled meats and spicy stews. Vendors might ladle yogurt into small bowls or clay cups, making it an easily portable refreshment in the desert climate. Markets in the Persian Empire were vibrant with life. Stalls lined the streets of cities like Persepolis and Susa, where traders from every corner of the empire converged. Imagine the mingling aromas, the smoky scent of roasting lamb, the sweetness of figs, the tang of yogurt, and the warmth of flatbreads baking in clay ovens. Food here reflected the empire's diversity, blending flavors from Greece, Mesopotamia, and India into a shared culinary language. Street food was also central to Persian hospitality. Even in the humblest stalls, vendors offered food with generosity, often with an emphasis on sharing. A skewer of meat or a piece of bread was never just for one. It was a reminder that meals were meant to connect people. Travelers stopping at stalls might be offered water or fruit alongside their purchase, a reflection of the cultural importance of welcoming the stranger. As the sun set over a Persian city, lamps lit the marketplaces, and families gathered around vendors for their evening meals. Soldiers on leave sat side by side with merchants, each savoring skewers of grilled lamb, sipping cool yogurt drinks, and tearing flatbread with their hands. The empire's grandeur could be felt even in these humble stalls, where food became a bridge between peoples, uniting the vast diversity of the Persian world in the simplest and most essential act, sharing a meal. Now we cross oceans and continents to arrive in the great cities of Mesoamerica, where the Aztec Empire flourished before European contact. Here, street food was deeply tied to maize, the sacred crop that formed the foundation of life and diet. To walk through the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan, the empire's magnificent capital, was to experience a sensory flood of sights, sounds, and aromas unlike anywhere else in the ancient world. Maize was everywhere, in every form. The most iconic street food was the tamale, dough made from masa, steamed inside corn husks, and filled with beans, chilies, or meats like turkey or rabbit. Vendors sold them hot from large steaming pots, unwrapping the husks to reveal fragrant, savory bundles. Tamales were portable, affordable, and endlessly adaptable, making them perfect for laborers, travelers, and even nobles on the move. Another common sight was tortillas, fresh from the comal, flat clay griddle. Tortillas served as both plate and utensil, folded around beans, roasted vegetables, or bits of meat. Vendors prepared them quickly, slapping the dough into flat discs and tossing them onto the hot surface, where they puffed and browned before being handed to waiting customers. The simple combination of tortilla, beans, and chilies was a staple street meal, flavorful and sustaining. Cacao drinks added richness to Aztec street food culture. Unlike the sweetened hot chocolate we know today, cacao in the Aztec world was often bitter, mixed with spices like chili, vanilla, and honey. Vendors whisked the drink until frothy, serving it in clay cups. For the Aztecs, cacao was not just a drink, but a symbol of prestige and divine energy, yet it was also widely available in the market, consumed by nobles and commoners alike. The markets of Tenochtitlan were vast, filled with stalls selling roasted insects, toasted grasshoppers, and other protein-rich foods. These were not oddities, but everyday snacks, crunchy, seasoned, and packed with nutrition. Fish and waterfowl from the city's surrounding lakes were grilled, dried or stewed, while chili peppers added spice to nearly every dish. Fruit vendors carried baskets of avocados, tomatoes, prickly pears, and papayas, their bright colors adding vibrancy to the market stalls. Street food was not only nourishment, but also a reflection of Aztec society. Markets were carefully organized, with inspectors ensuring fairness in trade and quality in goods. Food stalls were central to this order, providing sustenance to the thousands who passed through each day. Imagine the clamor of voices, the scent of masa steaming, chilies roasting, cacao frothing, and the constant rhythm of hands patting out tortillas. Eating in the market was both practical and communal. A farmer who had traveled for hours to sow maize could pause for a tamale before returning home. A nobleman, despite his wealth, might enjoy a cacao drink beside a merchant. Children begged for fruit or roasted insects, while weary travelers quenched their thirst with pulque, a mildly alcoholic drink made from the maguey plant. The energy of Tenochtitlan's street food scene was unparalleled. Vendors specialized in specific foods, some known for the best tamales, others for perfectly toasted tortillas or the richest cacao drinks. People returned to their favorite stalls, forming bonds with sellers who became part of the rhythm of daily life. As the sun set over the canals of the city, the markets glowed with torches, and the aroma of masa and roasted chilies lingered in the air. The people of the Aztec Empire understood something timeless, that food was not only fuel, but also a celebration of culture, community, and the gifts of the earth. Their street food traditions, rooted in maize and cacao, still echo today in the tortillas, tamales, and chocolate enjoyed around the world. Traveling deeper into Mesoamerica, we arrive among the Maya, whose civilization thrived in cities surrounded by jungles and fertile plains. Their bustling marketplaces were alive with color, sound, and flavor, and food was central to the exchange of goods and culture. While the Maya shared maize and cacao traditions with the Aztecs, their street food carried its own distinctive character, flavored by honey, tropical fruits, and inventive preparation. As with nearly all civilizations of the region, maize stood at the center of Maya foodways. Tortillas were prepared fresh each day, pressed thin by hand, and cooked over a clay griddle. These tortillas became the foundation of quick meals, wrapped around beans, chilies, or roasted vegetables. In the marketplaces of cities like Tikal or Copan, vendors worked tirelessly at their griddles, producing stacks of warm tortillas for the steady stream of hungry buyers. Tamales were another staple, filled with beans, squash, or meats, and steamed in leaves. While the Aztecs often used corn husks, the Maya sometimes wrapped their tamales in banana leaves, which lent a subtle aroma and softness to the dough. Street vendors prepared them in large clay pots, lifting the lid to release bursts of fragrant steam into the market air. For Maya travelers and farmers, these tamales provided a portable, satisfying meal that could be eaten quickly before returning to work. Cacao, as in Aztec tradition, held a special place in Maya culture. The Maya roasted cacao beans, ground them into a paste, and mixed them with water, chili, and sometimes honey to create a rich, bitter drink. Street vendors whisked the liquid until frothy, pouring it from one vessel to another until it foamed, and serving it in painted clay cups. For the Maya, cacao was not only a beverage, but a sacred element tied to myth and ceremony. Yet it was also a practical refreshment, enjoyed by traders, farmers, and nobles alike in the bustling markets. Honey was one of the great treasures of the Maya diet. They kept stingless bees, prized for their honey, which was lighter and more floral than the honey of other bees. Vendors sold honey by the gourd, or incorporated it into sweets and drinks. Children and adults alike enjoyed honey mixed with maize or fruits, a quick and energizing street snack. This honey trade was so important that it stretched across regions, making it a valuable commodity in both food and ritual. Fruits brought color and vibrancy to the markets. Vendors piled mangoes, papayas, guavas, and avocados high in woven baskets, their sweetness balancing the heat of chili-seasoned foods. Roasted cacao beans, salted and eaten as a snack, were also common. The combination of savory tamales, bitter cacao drinks, sweet honey, and fresh fruit created a symphony of flavors that defined the Maya food experience. Markets were more than commercial centers. They were social and cultural hubs. Families gathered at food stalls, not only to eat, but to exchange news and stories. A farmer selling maize might pause for a honey-sweetened cake before bargaining with a fruit vendor. A child tugging at his mother's tunic might beg for a cacao drink, while elders rested on shaded benches, chewing roasted maize kernels. Imagine the market at midday, the sound of traders calling out their prices, the smoky scent of tortillas crisping on clay griddles, the rhythmic patting of dough in a vendor's hands, and the bright chatter of people buying and eating together. Every stall offered not just food, but a sense of community and continuity. As evening fell, torches lit the stalls, and the flavors of maize, honey, and cacao lingered in the warm night air. For the Maya, street food was more than sustenance. It was a link between the sacred and the everyday, between the earth and the people, between tradition and innovation. The meals eaten in those vibrant markets were both practical and profound, grounding the Maya in their world while connecting them to something timeless and eternal. High in the rugged Andes Mountains, the Incan Empire built one of the most remarkable civilizations in history. Its roads stretched thousands of miles across difficult terrain. Its cities clung to steep cliffs, and its people developed ingenious ways to grow and preserve food in challenging landscapes. In this world, street food and market snacks were shaped not only by culture, but by the environment itself. Here, in Cusco or along the Incan roadways, food had to be hardy, portable, and suited for both high-altitude life and constant travel. The potato was the undisputed star of Incan cuisine. Domesticated in the Andes thousands of years before, potatoes came in countless varieties, from small purple tubers to large golden ones. Street vendors prepared them roasted in earthen pits, the smoky skins crackling as they were split open. A pinch of salt or a dollop of spicy sauce made from chili peppers turned these humble potatoes into flavorful snacks. For travelers, vendors also sold chuno potatoes that had been freeze-dried in the cold Andean nights and pressed until all moisture was removed. These lightweight, preserved potatoes could last for years and were often carried by soldiers and messengers on long journeys. Maize was another staple, often roasted into large, crunchy kernels that could be eaten by the handful. Vendors sold it in baskets, offering a simple but filling snack. Fresh maize was also boiled and eaten warm, sometimes accompanied by cheese or chili. In markets, chicha, a fermented drink made from maize, was sold in clay cups, frothy and mildly alcoholic. Chicha was not only a refreshment, but a key part of Incan ritual and hospitality. To drink chicha was to participate in community, whether in a small village gathering or a bustling urban market. Protein came from llamas and alpacas, whose meat was often dried into jerky, known as charqui. This dried meat was portable, lightweight, and durable, making it an essential food for soldiers and travelers. Street vendors sold strips of charqui that could be chewed directly or rehydrated in stews. Fish from the Pacific coast, carried inland along Incan roads, was dried and salted, available in markets even far from the sea. Peppers, herbs, and sauces added flavor to otherwise simple foods. Ají, a spicy pepper paste, was sold in small portions to be eaten with potatoes or maize. Cheese made from llama or alpaca milk also found its way into street stalls, offering a creamy counterbalance to the starch-heavy meals. Fruits like guava, chirimoya, and lucama were carried from lower valleys into mountain markets, adding bursts of sweetness to the Andean diet. Incan markets were carefully organized, often overseen by officials who ensured fair trade. Vendors set up their stalls in neat rows, with baskets of roasted maize, piles of potatoes, clay jars of chicha, and strips of charqui hanging on display. People from every corner of the empire gathered here, farmers from terraced fields, herders from mountain pastures, and traders who had walked for days along the empire's roads. Imagine standing in a Cusco marketplace as the sun rises over the Andes. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of roasting potatoes and the sound of vendors calling out their wares. A traveler stops for a steaming cup of chicha, warming his hands against the clay vessel, while children chew roasted maize kernels nearby. A soldier on leave buys a strip of charqui, slipping it into his pouch before disappearing into the crowd. What made Incan street food remarkable was its practicality. It reflected a civilization built on endurance, adaptation, and community. Every food had a purpose: potatoes for sustenance, chuno for survival, shisha for social bonds, charqui for mobility. Yet despite its practicality, Incan street food was flavorful, nourishing, and deeply tied to the rhythms of life in the mountains. As the day faded and torches lit the market stalls, the people of the Andes shared meals that sustained both body and spirit. In these humble foods, roasted potatoes, cups of chicha, strips of charqui, we glimpse the ingenuity of a people who carved a thriving empire from some of the most challenging landscapes on earth. Our journey now takes us to the diverse landscapes of Africa, where ancient kingdoms and bustling trade routes gave rise to rich and varied street food traditions. From the savannas of West Africa to the bustling ports along the Nile and the Red Sea, food was deeply connected to community, survival, and the sharing of abundance. African street foods reflected both the resilience of its people and the wealth of its natural resources, shaped by climates ranging from fertile river valleys to arid deserts. Two of the most important grains were millet and sorghum, staples that fed countless generations. Vendors in crowded markets roasted these grains until fragrant, selling them by the handful as quick, energy-rich snacks. Ground into flour, they became porridges or flatbreads, often eaten with stews of beans, greens, or meat. Imagine a vendor ladling steaming millet porridge into clay bowls, a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of spices, transforming a simple meal into something both filling and comforting. Beans and lentils were also central to African street foods. In Egypt and along the Nile Valley, fava beans were cooked into hearty stews, seasoned with garlic and herbs, and sold in bustling markets. This tradition, known today as fool madams, stretches back thousands of years and likely began as a street-side staple for workers, farmers, and travelers seeking nourishment. A clay pot simmering with beans would greet hungry passers-by, its scent drawing them closer for a bowl of rich, sustaining food. In West Africa, vendors offered roasted groundnuts, what many know today as peanuts, though in their earliest form, they may have been native legumes. These crunchy, savory snacks were carried in baskets, sold in small handfuls, and enjoyed by both children and adults. Palm oil, abundant in the region, flavored fried foods, and vendors sizzled fritters made of beans or grains, their golden crusts crisp from the oil. These fritters, eaten hot from the pan, were as much a social delight as a meal. Meat, when available, was often grilled over open flames. Skewers of goat, lamb, or chicken crackled on simple wooden spits, seasoned with salt and spices. In North Africa, bustling markets featured flatbreads wrapped around roasted meats, flavored with garlic and herbs. Fish, too, was common in coastal regions, dried and salted for preservation, or grilled fresh and sold directly on the street. Sweetness was found in honey and fruits. Dates were a favorite snack across North Africa, eaten fresh or dried, their sugary richness a quick source of energy. In sub-Saharan regions, mangoes, bananas, and melons were sold in woven baskets, their bright colors drawing eager buyers. Children might chew on pieces of sugarcane, sold in cut lengths by vendors, the juice dripping down their hands as they laughed and played. Markets were not just commercial centers, but also cultural crossroads. Along the trade routes of the Sahara, caravans carried salt, spices, and grains, and in the markets that grew up at these intersections, food vendors thrived. Imagine the scene at Timbuktu during its height: scholars discussing philosophy, traders bartering over gold, and vendors serving roasted millet cakes, bean stews, and sweet dates to sustain the crowds. Street food in ancient Africa reflected adaptability. In regions where water was scarce, grains and dried meats sustained travelers. In fertile valleys, fresh fruits, vegetables, and legumes provided color and variety. Across the continent, food was tied to sharing, to welcoming guests, and to nourishing both body and spirit. Picture the market at sunset: drums beating in the distance, women pounding millet into flour with rhythmic strikes, vendors shouting their wares, and the aroma of roasted meat and fritters filling the warm air. Families gathered, children darted between stalls, and travelers rested with bowls of porridge or handfuls of dates. It was in these lively spaces that the ancient traditions of African street food took root, carrying forward flavors and practices that endure to this day. From the deserts and savannas of Africa, our journey now carries us to the glittering city of Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. This city, straddling Europe and Asia, stood as a crossroads of trade and culture for more than 1,000 years. Its streets and marketplaces were alive with merchants from every corner of the known world, and with them came a dazzling variety of foods. For the ordinary people of Constantinople, street food was not only a daily necessity, but also a reflection of the empire's wealth, diversity, and connection to distant lands. Bread once again took center stage. In Constantinople, bakeries were everywhere, and bread was so essential that the state regulated its price and supply. Vendors sold flatbreads warm from the oven, often sprinkled with sesame seeds or brushed with oil. For those who could not afford elaborate meals, bread was the foundation of life, purchased from stalls that lined the city's thoroughfares. A worker in the Hippodrome district might grab a loaf on his way to a day of labor, while a sailor from the harbor might tear pieces of bread to eat with dried fish. Fish was a defining feature of Byzantine street food, thanks to the city's location on the Bosporus. Fresh catches from the Sea of Marmara, the Golden Horn, and the Black Sea poured into markets each day. Vendors grilled mackerel or sardines over open flames, their oily richness drawing long lines. Others sold salted fish, affordable and long-lasting, eaten with bread and olives. For many in Constantinople, fish was the protein they relied on most, available in endless varieties depending on the season. Vegetables and legumes also filled the stalls. Lentil soups, chickpeas stewed with garlic, and beans flavored with herbs were sold in clay balls to customers who stood and ate in the streets. These dishes were affordable and sustaining, making them staples for common people. Vendors might also roast onions or garlic over open flames, selling them by the handful to be eaten with bread. What set Byzantine street food apart was the influence of trade. Constantinople sat at the end of the Silk Road, and its markets carried spices and luxuries from faraway lands. Street vendors incorporated cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper into their dishes, transforming simple stews into flavorful meals. Sweet pastries, often layered with honey and nuts, hinted at the origins of what would later become baklava. Fruits like figs, pomegranates, and dates arrived from Syria and Egypt, while citrus fruits, new to the region, added bursts of flavor to drinks and desserts. Wine was sold in taverns and stalls, often diluted with water and flavored with herbs or spices. For those who wanted something sweet, honeyed wines and spiced drinks were available, particularly during festivals. Imagine the Feast of Easter or a bustling market day, when the smell of roasting meats mingled with the sweetness of honey cakes and the tang of spiced wine. The markets themselves were vibrant, noisy, and colorful. Vendors set up along narrow streets, calling out their wares in Greek, Latin, and dozens of other languages. A clang of church bells mixed with the cries of traders, while the aromas of garlic, fish, and cinnamon drifted through the air. Constantinople was a place where East met West, and its street food reflected this fusion, blending Roman traditions with Eastern influences. Picture yourself walking through the Mese, the city's main thoroughfare. On one side, bakers display golden loaves stacked high. On the other, fishmongers grill their catch, the smoke curling upward. A vendor offers spiced chickpeas in a clay bowl, while another sells pastries dripping with honey. Children tug at their parents' robes, begging for sweet treats, while monks and sailors alike pause for quick meals before returning to their duties. As night falls, lanterns flicker along the stalls, and Constantinople glows with the energy of commerce and community. In this city, where emperors sat on gilded thrones and humble workers filled the markets, street food was the great equalizer, accessible, flavorful, and infused with the spirit of a world that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Far East. As we move into the winding streets of medieval Europe, the world of street food changes yet again. Cities from London to Paris, from Prague to Florence, grew crowded with people who often lacked the means or space to cook their own meals. Fires were dangerous in wooden homes, kitchens were scarce, and fuel could be costly. For many, daily nourishment came not from their own hearths, but from vendors who filled the marketplaces, serving hot, ready-made meals to the masses. One of the most popular street foods of this era was the meat pie. Vendors prepared small, portable pies filled with beef, pork, chicken, or even game like venison, mixed with onions, herbs, and spices. Encased in a thick crust, these pies were easy to carry and could be eaten on the go. For wealthier customers, pies might include more exotic fillings like dates or saffron, but for the poor, they were simple and hearty, often padded with root vegetables. Imagine a bustling marketplace in London, the scent of hot pies drifting through the air as merchants called out their offerings. Roasted meats were another staple. Vendors set up spits in the open air, turning chickens, rabbits, or small cuts of pork over glowing coals. The smell of sizzling fat and smoke filled the streets, drawing crowds who lined up for slices of meat carved hot from the fire. Sausages, too, were sold from carts, greasy and seasoned, eaten with bread that soaked up the juices. These foods were both indulgent and practical, filling the stomach quickly on a cold day. Nuts and roasted chestnuts were common snacks, especially in the colder months. Vendors carried baskets or braziers, roasting chestnuts until their shells cracked and selling them by the handful. Children and adults alike warmed their hands on the hot nuts, peeling them open to reveal their soft, sweet interiors. To this day, the image of roasted chestnuts in winter owes much to these medieval traditions. Drinks played a central role in street food culture. Wine was often served warm and spiced, especially during festivals and markets. Vendors sold mulled wine in wooden cups, its aroma of cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg wafting through the air. Ale and beer were also widely available, poured from barrels into mugs for workers and travelers. These drinks were safer than water and provided both refreshment and calories. Sweet treats found their way into the markets as well. Honey cakes, gingerbread, and sugared almonds were sold during fairs and holy days, delights that lifted spirits in otherwise difficult lives. Imagine a medieval child tugging at his mother's sleeve, begging for a sticky cake or a piece of candied fruit as jugglers and musicians performed nearby. Markets themselves were vibrant, if often chaotic. Narrow streets filled with shouting vendors, the sound of ironmongers hammering, the cries of livestock, and the sense of roasting meat and spiced wine blended into a sensory whirlwind. Street food was both a necessity and a form of entertainment, part of the spectacle of city life. Fairs and festivals made this even more dramatic, with temporary stalls serving roasted meats, pies, sweets, and drinks to crowds gathered for jousts, music, and revelry. The culture of medieval street food also reflected social divisions. The wealthy could afford the most elaborate pastries and richly spiced wines, while the poor relied on bread, pottage, and the cheapest cuts of meat. Yet in the marketplace, these groups mingled, standing side by side as they ate, reminding us that food was one of the few spaces where boundaries blurred. Picture a winter evening in Paris. Snow falling on cobbled streets, vendors roasting chestnuts beneath flickering torches, musicians playing lutes, and crowds gathered with steaming cups of mulled wine. A traveler might pause for a pie filled with rabbit and herbs, while a group of children laugh with mouths sticky from honey cakes. Street food here was not only sustenance, but also comfort, a small joy against the hardships of medieval life. From the narrow alleys of medieval Europe, we now step into the radiant cities of the Islamic Golden Age. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, places like Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba thrived as centers of trade, science, art, and culture. Their markets were legendary, vast, organized, and filled with sights, sounds, and aromas that dazzled travelers from distant lands. Street food was not merely sustenance. It was part of the very fabric of daily life, shaped by a culture that valued hospitality, flavor, and the sharing of meals. The centerpiece of many stalls was lamb, roasted or grilled and seasoned with fragrant spices. Vendors cooked skewers of meat over open flames, brushing them with oil, garlic, and coriander. These skewers, ancestors of the modern kebab, were quick, savory, and portable, perfect for merchants pausing between transactions or travelers seeking nourishment after long journeys. Flatbreads, baked in clay ovens, accompanied nearly every meal, torn by hand and used to scoop up bites of meat, lentils, or stews. Rice, introduced widely through trade, became a beloved staple in many cities. Vendors sold fragrant rice dishes flavored with saffron, cinnamon, and dried fruits. These meals balanced sweetness and spice, reflecting the sophistication of Golden Age cuisine. Bowls of lentils, chickpeas, or fava beans, simmered with onions and herbs, were sold by vendors carrying large pots, ladling portions into clay bowls for hungry customers. Sweets occupied a special place in these markets. Honey-drenched pastries, layered with nuts and dough, echoed the beginnings of what we now know as baklava. Candied fruits, sugar syrups, and nut-based confections glistened in stalls, tempting both children and adults. Dates, stuffed with almonds or dipped in honey, were simple yet beloved snacks. For festivals or holy days, vendors prepared elaborate treats, turning the streets into celebrations of flavor and abundance. Drinks, too, were a vital part of street culture. Sharbat sweet, flavored drinks made from fruit syrups, rosewater, or herbs offered refreshment in the heat of the day. Yogurt-based drinks cooled and soothed, while sweetened milk with spices provided energy. And toward the later centuries, one of the most transformative beverages appeared: coffee. In bustling cities like Cairo and later Istanbul, coffee houses began to emerge, where people gathered to drink the bitter, energizing brew, converse, and share ideas. These spaces became intellectual and social hubs, but on the streets, vendors also sold small cups of coffee to passersby, fueling both body and mind. The bazaars themselves were unforgettable. Covered markets with vaulted ceilings echoed with the calls of merchants, the bray of donkeys carrying goods, and the laughter of children weaving between stalls. Vendors displayed piles of spices cumin, cardamom, cinnamon, black pepper, filling the air with their aromas. The sizzle of lamb skewers, the bubbling of chickpea stews, and the clatter of cups created a constant rhythm. Food here reflected both the empire's reach and its love of blending flavors, drawing from Persia, India, North Africa, and beyond. Street food in the Islamic Golden Age also reflected values of generosity and community. Vendors often offered water or bread freely to those in need, and hospitality was considered both a duty and a joy. To share food was to share faith and culture. Picture a merchant in Baghdad pausing for a skewer of lamb, dipping bread into lentils, then cooling himself with a sweet rosewater drink before continuing his work. A student of philosophy might sip coffee while discussing ideas in a nearby stall, while a child, clutching a honey-dipped pastry, listens wide-eyed to a storyteller performing in the square. As the evening lamps lit the bazaars, the streets glowed with warmth and life. The mingling aromas of roasted meats, spiced rice, sweet pastries, and bitter coffee lingered in the air, weaving together the essence of a civilization at its peak. In these stalls, meals were not just about eating. They were about connection, culture, and the joy of being part of a thriving, diverse world. Crossing seas to the islands of Japan, we find ourselves in a land where rice paddies stretched across valleys and fishing boats dotted the coasts. In early Japanese history, long before bustling metropolises like Edo or Tokyo, food vendors already played a role in sustaining busy farmers, travelers, and merchants. Simplicity, balance, and seasonality defined Japanese cuisine, and even the humblest street foods reflected these values. Rice, the lifeblood of Japan, formed the foundation of countless street foods. Vendors prepared small rice cakes, known as mochi, by pounding glutinous rice into soft, chewy rounds. These cakes could be eaten plain, flavored with soy sauce, or coated in sweet bean paste. Portable and filling, they were sold in marketplaces, at temple fairs, and near roadside shrines, offering quick nourishment to pilgrims and farmers alike. Rice balls, shaped by hand and sometimes wrapped in seaweed, provided another simple but enduring snack. These early versions of onigiri were easy to carry and suited the needs of travelers walking long roads between villages. Fish, abundant in surrounding seas, was also central to Japanese street food. Vendors grilled skewers of small fish over open fires, brushing them with salty soy-based sauces. These skewers, eaten hot from the flames, were cheap, flavorful, and widely available in coastal towns. In inland areas, dried fish provided a portable source of protein, sold by merchants who carried baskets from village to village. Imagine a fisherman at dawn, roasting his catch on the shore and selling skewers to those heading off to work in the fields. Vegetables and tofu also played a role in street cuisine. Simple soups made with miso paste were sold in wooden bowls, steaming and savory. Vendors carried vats of hot broth, adding chunks of tofu, seaweed, or vegetables, depending on availability. For travelers stopping at roadside stalls, a bowl of miso soup and a rice cake could be both comforting and sustaining. In the colder months, roasted chestnuts were sold in baskets, their smoky sweetness warming hands and hearts. Festivals brought special treats to the streets. During seasonal celebrations, vendors sold skewered rice dumplings called dango, grilled and glazed with sweet soy syrup. These were enjoyed by children and adults alike, carried on sticks through lantern-lit streets. Such festival foods were not just about taste, but about marking the passage of seasons, linking the act of eating to cycles of nature and tradition. Street foods were often found near temples and shrines, where pilgrims gathered. Vendors positioned themselves along pilgrimage routes, selling rice cakes, tea, and snacks to travelers who had come to pray. Eating at these stalls became part of the rhythm of spiritual journeys, blending nourishment with devotion. Even the preparation of mochi carried ceremonial meaning, with its pounding and shaping tied to ritual and celebration. Markets in early Japan were lively but modest compared to the sprawling bazaars of the Islamic world. Wooden stalls or carts held steaming pots, baskets of chestnuts, or piles of rice cakes wrapped in leaves. Vendors called softly to passers-by, offering warmth and sustenance in a culture that valued subtlety and harmony. The foods were simple but satisfying, emphasizing natural flavors over heavy seasoning. Picture a village square in the Heian period, women carrying baskets of vegetables, monks collecting offerings, and vendors roasting skewers of fish as children laugh nearby. The air is cool, filled with the sound of wooden flutes and the crackle of fire as rice dumplings cook on sticks. A farmer, weary from his fields, stops for a rice ball and a cup of hot miso broth. A pilgrim, traveling toward a distant shrine, buys a packet of dried fish for the road. These moments of eating bound the people together, weaving everyday life with ritual and tradition. In Japan's early street food culture, we see the seeds of a culinary tradition that continues today: simplicity, balance, and respect for ingredients. Rice cakes, fish skewers, miso soups, these were not only meals but expressions of a philosophy that found beauty in the modest and the fleeting. Each bite was a reflection of both sustenance and spirit, tying body and soul to the natural rhythms of the world. Our path now takes us into the bustling river valleys and coastal towns of ancient Southeast Asia, a region where cultures intertwine through trade, migration, and the steady flow of spices. From the markets of Angkor to the ports of the Malay Peninsula, food was sold and shared in ways that reflected both local traditions and the influence of traders from India, China, and beyond. The streets and waterways were alive with food vendors, their stalls glowing with firelight and their dishes filled with bold, fragrant flavors. Rice was once again at the heart of this cuisine, though here it was often transformed into noodles. Thin rice noodles, boiled in vats of broth, became a popular street food. Vendors ladled steaming noodles into bowls, topping them with herbs, chili, and sometimes slices of pork, fish, or chicken. The broths themselves were rich and varied, seasoned with ginger, garlic, lemongrass, and fish sauce. The aromas of these soups drifted through the air, drawing both locals and travelers to gather around small wooden tables. Satay-like skewers of meat, roasted over open flames, were another beloved street food. Small pieces of chicken, beef, or fish were marinated in spices and grilled until charred and smoky. Vendors fanned the flames as the skewers cooked, brushing them with sauces made of palm sugar, chili, or tamarind. Customers carried these skewers in hand as they moved through crowded markets, the flavor of spiced meat mingling with the heat of the night. Coconut, abundant in the region, flavored many street foods. Vendors sold coconut rice wrapped in banana leaves, sweet cakes made with coconut milk, or drinks of cool coconut water served fresh from the shell. Bananas, mangoes, and pineapples filled stalls with their vivid colors, sliced and served as refreshing snacks. Sticky rice with fruit, drizzled with coconut cream, was a common street dessert, enjoyed by children and adults alike. Seafood also played a central role, as many communities lived close to rivers or coasts. Fish was grilled, fried, or simmered in soups. Shrimp and shellfish were sold in baskets, seasoned with chili and salt. Vendors in port towns often prepared meals specifically for sailors, quick to serve and easy to carry aboard ships. The variety of seafood reflected the region's abundance and its ties to maritime life. The markets themselves were lively and unique, often set along rivers where vendors sold food from boats. These floating markets, early versions of the tradition still seen today, created a magical atmosphere. Imagine paddling through a narrow canal, with vendors in wooden boats offering steaming bowls of noodles, grilled skewers, and baskets of tropical fruit. The clatter of ladles, the call of sellers, and the splashing of oars blended into a symphony of commerce and community. Spices defying the character of Southeast Asian street food. Cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and chili traveled along trade routes, enriching the flavors of local dishes. Palm sugar added sweetness, while fish sauce added depth and saltiness. These ingredients created bold contrasts of sweet, sour, salty, and spicy that came to define the region's cuisine. A single bite of a street vendor as soup or skewer could deliver all these flavors at once, awakening the senses even as it sustained the body. Picture a marketplace in ancient Angkor at dusk. The stone temples rise in the distance as torches illuminate stalls piled with fruits and steaming pots of broth. A vendor ladles noodles into bowls, topping them with herbs and chili. Nearby, skewers of meat sizzle over coals, while children lick honey-drizzled rice cakes. Boats glide along the river, their vendors calling out as they sell food to those on shore. The scene is alive with light, color, and sound. Every stall a reflection of a region, bound together by flavor and trade. Street food in ancient Southeast Asia was more than convenience. It was a celebration of abundance, diversity, and connection. The dishes carried the essence of the land and the sea, the influence of distant traders, and the creativity of local cooks. Even now, the street food traditions of this region echo with these ancient roots, telling a story of people who found joy in the simple, shared act of eating together. Our journey now carries us to the lands of North America before European contact, where diverse Native American cultures thrived across plains, forests, coasts, and mountains. Each region developed its own ways of preparing and sharing food, shaped by the environment and seasonal abundance. While the concept of street food here did not take the form of organized markets like those in Rome or Constantinople, Native communities embraced public feasting and food sharing that carried the same spirit. What was cooked, roasted, or offered at communal gatherings often mirrored what might be called street fare in other parts of the world: simple, portable, and shared among many. Corn, known as maize, formed the backbone of native diets across much of the continent. Cornbread and corn cakes were common, baked on hot stones or in earthen pits. These breads were sold and shared during communal gatherings, flavored with beans, squash, or honey. Some were made soft and chewy, others crisp and thin, depending on the region. Imagine a gathering at a village festival, where corn cakes fresh from the fire were passed around, their smoky sweetness filling the cool night air. Fish was another essential part of native diets, especially along rivers, lakes, and coastal regions. Vendors, or more accurately, skilled cooks at communal markets or gatherings, roasted fish on open flames or smoked it over long fires, creating portable meals that could be carried for days. Salmon in the Pacific Northwest was celebrated not only as a staple food, but as a sacred gift. Communities dried strips of salmon and sold or traded them, making this a form of portable street food. In the Northeast, rivers teemed with fish like trout and bass, often roasted and eaten fresh at markets or gatherings. Maple was another treasure, particularly for peoples of the Northeast. Maple sap was collected and boiled into syrup or hardened into candy, providing sweet treats that children eagerly anticipated. Vendors at seasonal markets might offer maple cakes or syrup-drizzled cornbread, simple delights that connected food to the rhythms of nature. Honey and wild berries also provided sweetness, sold fresh or dried for later enjoyment. Meats such as venison, rabbit, and bison were prepared in ways that made them portable. Strips of meat were dried into jerky, much like the Incan charqui, sustaining hunters and travelers on long journeys. In some communities, mixtures of dried meat, fat, and berries, known as pemmican, were crafted into dense, nutritious food that could last for months. This was a vital resource during winters, but also a quick, portable food to carry while traveling. Vegetables and legumes also made their way into shared meals. Beans, roasted squash, and wild greens were cooked in clay pots and served to families and visitors alike. Vendors and cooks in communal spaces often combined these with cornbread or flat cakes, creating hearty, satisfying meals that nourished both body and spirit. Food in native communities was always tied to sharing and ritual. Markets and communal gatherings were not only about trade, but about feasting together. Food was prepared in large quantities, with some offered to visitors, elders, or those in need. Eating was never just about filling the stomach. It was about affirming bonds within the community and with the natural world. Imagine walking into a gathering at dusk, The smell of roasted fish filling the air, the sweetness of maple syrup drifting over fires, and families sitting together, tearing pieces of cornbread and sharing stories. Street fare in the Native American world was not confined to stalls or vendors, but lived in the communal and the seasonal. It reflected a deep respect for the land and its cycles, with food tied to rituals of thanks and renewal. Each bite of cornbread, each sip of maple syrup, each piece of roasted fish carried with it the story of the earth, the seasons, and the people. As the firelight flickered and drums echoed across the night, the act of eating together bound communities to one another and to the world around them. In this way, Native American street fare was not only nourishment, it was a celebration of life, tradition, and the eternal rhythm of nature. As we near the end of our journey, it is time to look at how the traditions of ancient street food evolved into the modern culture we know today. For thousands of years, food sold in markets, on streets, and at festivals fed the working poor, travelers, and the curious. What began as bread and beer in Mesopotamia, tamales in the Aztec Empire, or roasted fish in Japan, eventually transformed into the vibrant global street food culture that exists across every continent. The continuity is astonishing, but so too is the innovation. The fall of empires and the rise of new powers did not erase the old ways. In fact, many of the foods once sold by ancient vendors remain part of modern diets. Roman thermopolia with their stews and breads look remarkably similar to today's fast food counters. In India, fried fritters and flatbreads remain staples of roadside stalls. In China, dumplings and noodle soup still draw crowds in night markets, just as they did in Han Dynasty streets. Ancient practices lived on, adapted to new ingredients, technologies, and tastes. The age of exploration expanded street food traditions dramatically. As European ships sailed to the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they carried not only goods, but also flavors. Tomatoes from the New World transformed Mediterranean cooking. Chilies from the Americas found their way into Indian, Thai, and Chinese street foods, forever changing the flavor of their dishes. Corn, once sacred to the Aztecs and Maya, became polenta in Italy and cornbread in North America. Sugar, once rare and precious, grew abundant, fueling the rise of pastries, candies, and sweet drinks that appeared in street stalls across Europe and beyond. Urbanization in the medieval and early modern periods also reshaped street food. As cities swelled with people, vendors became essential. In London, meat pies, roasted chestnuts, and hot wine sustained workers in cold streets. In Istanbul, vendors sold grilled meats, bread, and strong coffee to locals and travelers alike. In Tokyo, stalls sold rice balls, fish skewers, and soups to merchants and samurai. The idea of grabbing a quick meal outside the home became universal. With industrialization in the 18th and 19th centuries, street food evolved yet again. Cities like Paris, New York, and Shanghai saw explosive growth, and with it came street vendors who sold inexpensive meals to factory workers and immigrants. Hot dogs, pretzels, roasted peanuts, and noodle carts became part of daily life. The foods were humble, yet they carried forward the same traditions as the tamale seller of Tenochtitlan or the bread baker of ancient Egypt: affordable, portable, and nourishing. Today, modern street food is both global and deeply local. Food trucks in Los Angeles serve Korean tacos, a fusion of traditions from two continents. Night markets in Bangkok brim with skewers, noodles, and soups that echo ancient recipes. Hawker centers in Singapore bring together foods from China, India, and Malaysia under one roof. In Mexico, tamales and tacos sold on street corners connect directly to Aztec roots. In every corner of the world, street food continues to be the food of the people, rich with history and alive with flavor. What unites all these traditions is not just convenience, but connection. Street food has always been about more than eating. It has been about gathering, sharing, and belonging. From ancient farmers stopping at a stall after a long day in the fields, to modern city dwellers grabbing lunch on the go, the experience is timeless. Eating in the street connects us to each other, to our cultures, and to thousands of years of history. Imagine standing in a modern market at night. Neon lights glow overhead, music fills the air, and stalls serve food from every part of the world. Yet as you bite into a skewer of grilled meat or sip a hot bowl of noodles, you are tasting something ancient. You are sharing in a tradition that stretches back to the first cities, to the fireside bread sellers of Mesopotamia, the tamale makers of Tenochtitlan, and the fish vendors of Constantinople. Street food is history made edible. It is the story of humanity itself, our migrations, our innovations, our struggles, and our celebrations. It reminds us that no matter where we are or when we live, the act of eating together in public has always been part of what it means to be human. And so our journey comes to a gentle end after wandering through the streets of ancient cities, markets, and empires. We've walked among the bread stalls of Mesopotamia, tasted beer along the Nile, paused in the agras of Greece, and leaned against the counters of Romang Thermopolia. We've stood in the bustling markets of the Aztec Empire, felt the steam of dumplings in Han Dynasty China, and smelled the sweetness of honey cakes in Byzantium. Across continents and centuries, one thing has remained constant: the human need for food that is simple, nourishing, and shared. Street food is more than a quick bite. It is a window into the lives of ordinary people. It shows us what farmers, laborers, sailors, and children ate when they were hungry, what smells and flavors filled their days, and how communities came together around humble meals. From roasted chestnuts on a medieval winter night to tamales steaming in the markets of Tenochtitlan, these foods carried with them the heartbeat of their cultures. And even now, as we walk through modern markets and food stalls, we are tasting echoes of the past. If you enjoyed this journey through history, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can drift into sleep with more stories from the past. Share in the comments what moments of history you'd like to explore next, and also let me know when you listen, whether it's as you're resettling down at night or during quiet moments in the day. Your thoughts not only guide the future of this channel, but also help others find their way to these calming explorations of history. So as you close your eyes tonight, let the memories of ancient markets settle around you like a warm blanket. Picture the glow of firelight, the chatter of distant voices, and the scent of bread, spices, and sweets drifting through the air. In that timeless space, you are part of a story that stretches back thousands of years, a story written in food, in flavor, and in the joy of sharing a meal. Sleep well, and may the past keep you company through the night.